The aspect of the world of tradition that is most often misunderstood is the deep mystery of the rite, because nowhere is the severance of the ancient teachings more apparent than in this most crucial area of knowledge. The warrior caste can maintain itself through the practice of martial arts and warfare, but the priestly caste cannot merely engage in a physical act to renew its purpose and efficacy. On the contrary, the priest relies upon an unbroken chain of knowledge to renew the primacy and purpose of the ritual. Without the effectiveness of the ritual, there is no foundation for the priest upon which to build his temples. Without the rite, there are only empty words, blind faith, and broken promises. In many ways, the ritual is both the path and the language of the divine, the bridge that man builds to connect him to the transcendent, and compels the heavens to act upon the earth in a transformative way. But such knowledge is secretive for good reasons, because few are prepared to wield it. One cannot simply stumble upon this knowledge. It must be conferred by initiation. How to rediscover what has been lost? If there are no living authorities, how does one come to stir the ancient magic? Have the gods fallen silent because no one remains who knows how to reawaken their essence? In our modern world, which is so hyper-focused on empiricism, the rite is often seen as an anthropological artifact from ancient times, or perhaps as a curious cultural oddity, but in all cases, something inefficacious or based on superstition. Those who research ancient cultures who stumble across the remnants of these rites often have no explanation for them other than as silly religious nonsense of a people too primitive to worship the modern god of science. And so the perennial wisdom transmitted by these rites is lost on them, for they do not understand the mysteries. A mystery is an allegorical understanding of a story in which is woven critical knowledge of man's means of accessing the transcendent. Like a wall that springs open into a secret passageway when touched in the right spot, the mystery teachings are also a case of more than meets the eye. But only when one journeys along the path of initiation and experiential wisdom does one come to realize exactly how deep the mystery goes. The modern mind may have a tendency to want to dismiss such ideas, not only because it may sound fanciful, but simply because the language used to describe them often sounds vague or overly poetic. However, we must acknowledge that we lack the vocabulary to accurately describe these metaphysical forces, and due to the nature of the subject matter, the more empirical and precise one tries to be in talking about it, the further away one goes from actually grasping it. Thus, any discussion is naturally handicapped by the lack of vocabulary. Accurate transmission of these concepts was always found in the experience of them, rather than in cold cognitive analysis. Thus, the wisdom is transmitted through allegory, and an allegorical story may often have many layers of meaning. Allegory gives us a template through which to understand the metaphysical principles of the universe in a simplified enough way that the human mind can understand it. It grasps at the unknown and tries to communicate divinity to us. Rites are a means of conveying the cosmic order into the material world. Evola notes the etymological connection between the word rite, from the Latin ritus, and the Sanskrit rita, meaning cosmic order. In the Chinese tradition, the rites were the channels by which we can apprehend the ways of heaven. The establishment of the rites, which were taught to humans by the gods, were essential to the founding of any new city or empire, and was firstly the prerogative of the king, followed by the priestly caste, the magistrates, and finally the heads of households. Evola says, in the ancient traditional way of life, both at an individual and at a collective level, every action was connected with a determined ritual element that acted as its support and as the transfiguring and guiding element from above. Thus, the rite has a close connection with the law, that is, the law from above. When one is connected to the transcendent, one naturally acts in line with the cosmic order, in line with the rites, because that is the state of being that would naturally vibrate with that person. One would feel harmonious rather than dissonant. In this chapter, Evola focuses primarily on one specific class of rites, the sacrificial rite. This is the type of ritual action from which heroes are born. According to ancient Vedic texts, in the beginning there was only Brahman, the Godhead or the source of the entire universe. Evola says that Brahman created a higher and more perfect form of itself, and from this act the entities that are the heavenly archetypes of divine and triumphal regality were manifested. And he refers to Brahman as a sort of unconscious energy and impersonal effulgence of God. But what he is really referring to here is one of the energies of God. God is the source of the primordial power to which Evola refers, and it is through directing that unconscious primordial energy to act upon insentient matter that the universe was formed. Thus, the emanation of the material universe comes from a spiritual energy that has created a more perfect form of itself by fulfilling its potential with the manifestation of material energy. Perfection comes from the whole and full manifestation and the completion of its potential. If any are left unmanifest, the potential is not fulfilled, and perfection is not achieved. Evola uses this story to illustrate a principle that is connected with an entire class of sacrificial rites, that is, rites which correspond to producing a heroic and aristocratic immortality. We can immediately see that the idea of going beyond oneself, of fulfilling one's potential, of manifesting one's own being, is essential to the heroic pathway that these sacrificial rites are connected to. Thus, the initial sacrifice in the Vedic literature is that of the divine being transmuting lower energies into higher ones in order to become the universe, and so the spirit of sacrifice came to be recognized as the source of creation and the heart of all creative forces. For example, consider the story of the Norse god Odin, who discovered the runes. The runes are not merely letters, but keys to sacred divine mysteries which allow one to access and interact with the world-shaping energies they symbolize. The runes would only be revealed to one who proved himself worthy of such awe-inspiring insights and abilities, and so Odin hung himself from the world tree Yggdrasil, pierced himself with his spear, and forbade any to offer him assistance. He teetered on the precipice of life and death for 9 days, until at last the runes had accepted his sacrifice and revealed to him their secrets. Thus was Odin initiated into the mysteries of the runes. In many initiatic traditions, the initiate was required to face a kind of death that would allow him to be twice born, to become Arya. In some cases, the ordeals could actually result in physical death, and so the initiate must be prepared for extreme physical or mental trials, and to do this he must be non-attached to his own materiality and be prepared to sacrifice his life in exchange for divine wisdom. In the Havamal, Odin says, "Wounded I hung on a wind-swept gallows for 9 long nights, pierced by a spear pledged to Odin, offered myself to myself." In sacrificing himself to himself, Odin exemplifies the concept of going beyond oneself, of sacrificing one's lower nature to achieve something higher. It is in so doing that Odin points the way to Valhalla, a path of heroism in which one can achieve a Uranian immortality. The tarot card of the Hanged Man is also related to this. One of the most mysterious cards in the tarot deck, it symbolizes the ultimate sacrifice, to die on the cross of our own travails, yet still shining with the glory of divine understanding. Wisdom, not death, is the reward for this voluntary sacrifice. He wins through surrendering. He sacrifices himself, yet emerges the victor. In a way, it is a paradox of action. Through death, we achieve life. Was this not also the message of Jesus on the cross? The divine ascetic who voluntarily sacrificed himself to death, also hanging between life and death for several days, only to finally die, arise from the dead, and ascend to heaven. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father except through me." This is the path that Jesus laid out, the path of sacrificing oneself for the sake of transcendence, a mystery that lies at the core of every authentic spirituality, whatever its form. And so this type of sacrifice is one that generates a god or a hero by creating a certain ontological character and a certain divine connection on the part of the person performing the sacrifice. To become heroes, we must conquer our lower natures and go beyond, in a process that can often feel painful or frightening, a sort of burning away of the dead wood of the state of becoming, so that we can achieve being and union with the divine. Evola also speaks of Osiris, who, in the Egyptian tradition, was believed to be the god who taught the rites to mankind. Osiris too experienced a death and resurrection. Rites were discovered by a god or a hero through a sacrificial action, and the repetition of the rite on a regular schedule, perhaps daily or annually, was designed to tap into the unconscious energy of a particular heavenly archetype, the god whose story was being reenacted, and through regular repetition would reinvigorate the god to become more self-aware, to go beyond itself. Paying homage to the god, honoring the god, and invigorating the god would allow that god to wake from his slumber, to live again in conscious awareness for a time, and to be reconnected to the living. In this sense, the rite was mutually beneficial for both god and man. Evola says that there are two elements found in traditional civilizations or castes characterized by a Uranian chrism. The first element, he says, is a materialistic and naturalistic one. It consists of the transmission of something related to blood and race, namely a vital force that originates in the subterranean world, together with the elementary, collective, and ancestral influences. This vital substratum is similar to Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, but more specific to individual groups of people. These are the elements of the inferior world, connected to matter and regeneration and the horizontal aspects of life. It is the biospirit of a people, through which culture is the expression of this unconquered energy, and in certain classes of people is contained a greater concentration of this supernatural energy. The second element, he says, is from above, and it is conditioned by the transmission and by the uninterrupted performance of rites that contain the secret of a certain transformation and domination realized with the above-mentioned vital substratum. This is the divine element, the one that leads men to become more like gods and less like animals. These lower and higher forces meet within the rite. The regular performance of the rite strengthens and conditions the higher element in man, which causes his higher element to dominate and transform his lower element. Thus, the ritual is, in a way, about encoding a path to the transcendent. Evola lays out 3 distinct phases of the sacrificial rite. The first phase is purification. The person performing the rite would need to cleanse themselves of any material impurities. In some cases, this could involve bathing, meditation or prayer, fasting, or eating a certain type of food, reciting mantras, or other similar things. Just as a surgeon lays out all his tools before making an incision, so too must the initiate be properly prepared. This person must be able to control the spiritual forces he's conjuring up, be able to handle any spiritual blowback, and have a spiritual defense against any metaphysical energies that might seek to harm him for having invoked them. The second phase is saturation. Here, the supernatural energies are evoked, gathered, and focused into a specific vessel. This vessel might be either the person performing the sacrifice, a victim, or both, or perhaps even a third element depending on how the rite was structured. When evoking these subterranean elements, they cannot live in the rocks or the sky, but must live in the human spirit, which is connected to blood and caste. Thus, in this phase, the energies were gathered and focused, and the vessel was saturated with those energies. The third phase is actualization. In this phase, there would be some kind of action performed that would induce a crisis of sorts and actualize the presence of the god out of the substance of the supernatural energies. What occurs here is the contact between becoming and being. Evola says that what took place was something similar to the releasing and the resealing of hidden forces. In other words, what took place was the evocative renewal of the contact with the infernal forces that acted as the substratum of a primordial deification, as well as with the violence that freed and elevated them to a higher form. This primordial deification refers to a god that is not fully aware of itself as a god. It is analogous to the energies of Brahman before they were manifested into the universe. The sacrificial rite is like opening a portal to evoke a god energy, but a subconsciousness of that god. In order to elevate that god to a higher self-aware form, the rite is necessary. And that Evola refers to it as violent is evocative of the whole concept of sacrifice. Sacrificing one's lower nature to become something higher is necessarily violent in that it involves destruction and dissolution, a burning away of those parts of ourselves that keep us from reaching the full flowering of our potential. The fire in our souls brings us to wisdom, and the sacrificial rite renders truth. Evola is clear that a rite must be performed without any deviation from its original form. Rites that deviated or went wrong were considered a sacrilege, as it wounded or defaced the god in some way, and there was the potential for dreadful forces to be unleashed. Thus, those who performed the rites needed to be virile heroes, as there was real danger associated with the rites for this reason. The god is a hero against the forces of chaos. He is the establishment of order. When one improperly evokes the energies of a god, one diminishes the power of order against chaos and defaces the avatar, making it easier for chaos to overcome it. Evola notes that there is an element of these energies that is purely objective and does not care who is performing the rite. So long as it is done eos strictum, any person could theoretically evoke the supernatural forces, just as one who does not know how to drive could still put a key in the ignition of the car and start it up. If one performs a proper action, one will attain a proper result. Due to the danger, not just to the unqualified person performing the rite, but to society at large, rites were typically restricted only to those who had been initiated into their secrets and who had undergone tests of character and spiritual strength. In the egalitarian modern age, one might feel that this is unfair that such knowledge and power was only available to a spiritual aristocracy. However, this expression of hierarchy is in line with the metaphysical nature of the universe, and certain powers should only be wielded by those who understand them. Initiation ensures that the supernatural powers were only bestowed onto the proper bearer and functions like a secret password to ensure that the proper lineage between past, present, and future is established. It is a means of safeguarding the secrets, to preserve knowledge in a pure way, and bestowed only on one deemed worthy. When the priestly caste becomes corrupted, the clear chain of initiation is broken, and eventually the mystery and its rites will become only degraded, ineffective, empty ceremonies, or forgotten completely. This is how religions fall. Although the writings may survive, we have lost the esoteric knowledge of how to interpret them. The true ritual has been lost because the initiatic hierarchy, which ensures the knowledge is transmitted in a pure state, has fallen. In this age where individualism and egalitarianism reigns, many spiritual seekers fall into the trap of taking a rather Nietzschean approach and attempt to become their own guru and find their own path. But as the saying goes, one who is his own guru has a fool for a disciple. The rules laid out by the gods are not meant to chain, but to support, and in following those rules we have the best chance of success. Attempting to go it alone, while perhaps possible for the exceptional person, is much like trying to travel through a foreign land without a map nor speaking the native tongue. But then where does that leave us? We have lost the rites. The disciplic succession of initiation has been broken, and the patrician class has been absorbed into the masses. The gods seem to be asleep. Can the gods be roused from their slumber without the proper rituals? Can we once again recreate that divine connection? The cyclical theory of history answers a resounding yes. It posits that the process of degradation eventually leads to great death and destruction, terrible human suffering, and a releasing of abyssal forces that act as elements of chaos. When the center can no longer hold, there arises in man an eternal urge to restore dharmic order, the desire to make the world right again. When this is paired with a heroic Olympian element that is willing to sacrifice everything, then the supernatural fires are lit once again, the divine water begins to flow, and the old cracks and tributaries are renewed with life. Stirred from its slumber, the metaphysical collective unconscious becomes self-aware again, revitalized by the regeneration of the primordial sacrifice. The supernatural fires become lit like beacons atop sacred peaks, and the pathway to something more than life is illuminated. There is no clear road back to what has been lost. It would seem to the modern mind that this pathway is forever closed to man. The sacred rituals have either lost their power, or their true meaning has been forgotten. Few are those who have had personal contact with these energies, and who speak from a place of direct knowledge rather than by way of theories. The priestly caste has fallen into a deep sleep. Many of those born for such a vocation in healthier times instead wander aimlessly through the modern confusion of the spirit that has infected our culture. But somehow, by the tiniest of threads, the link to the mystical past still holds. The circuits have been stirred, and the first signs of an awakening have begun to appear. But just as trees must grow deep roots before they begin to reach for the sky, so too does the visible journey to retrace the ancient steps not initially appear to promote visible change. But on the ontological level, deep in the souls of those who have managed to avert their eyes before the abyss pulled them down, real change is occurring. wind long forgotten has started to blow again, and it carries upon it the whispers of the gods. It is the sacrifice of Odin on Yggdrasil. It is Christ upon the cross. It is Osiris dying and reborn. It is the gift of the Son to give life again to his Father. It is the collective cognition of the souls of the unavenged. It is you, flowering into the divine being that you were born to be, seeing in your own inner vision the incredible life-affirming potential that humanity represents. There is a secret knowledge, all but lost, that in a Promethean sense should be the domain of mankind. It was the mysterious power behind Atlantis, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, the loss of which foreshadowed their downfall. It is said in the Vedas that when one is ready for this knowledge, that a learned guru would surreptitiously appear with the needed guidance. And so the task now is to be prepared, both internally and externally, to transform the radical energies of the modern age and integrate them into a consolidated life. The most critical groundwork needs to be constructed. In 1928, the esoteric philosopher Manly P. Hall wrote, "The time will come when the secret wisdom shall again be the dominating religious and philosophical urge of the world. The day is at hand when the doom of dogma shall be sounded. The great theological Tower of Babel, with its confusion of tongues, was built of bricks of mud and mortar of slime. Out of the cold ashes of lifeless creeds, however, shall rise phoenix-like the ancient mysteries. The dying God shall rise again." The dying God shall rise again. The dying God shall rise again. The dying God shall rise again.
Though the modern world may know a million secrets, the ancient world knew one. And that one was greater than the million. For the million secrets breed death, disaster, sorrow, selfishness, lust, and avarice. But the one secret confers life, light, and truth.